If your child is stuck in an endless cycle of runny noses, congestion, and itchy eyes, and spring allergies, this video is for you. You're not alone in this, and it's very common for us to see lots of allergies, especially this time of year. But what's going on, and how can we find a real lasting solution? So, in this video, we're going to talk about some of the root causes in why we're seeing so many allergy symptoms, especially in kids, but also in adults, and then also some ways that we can help and address that. Oftentimes, you may feel like you've tried everything under the sun and you're looking for something to really give you the answers that you're looking for. So, hopefully, we can unpack that for you in this video and you can leave feeling equipped and ready to take on spring allergies, especially since spring is here and things are blooming. Okay, well, what's really behind spring allergies? So, really, ultimately, we're looking at a threefold response. So, what's happening? First of all, what's happening is the immune system is overactive. And so, when exposed to allergens like pollen, the immune system is overreactive, and therefore it's producing histamines, which then create the symptoms itchy eyes, congestion, runny nose. So, we have an overactive immune system, and then we have an actual drainage issue. And this is something that chiropractic really shines in because really ultimately, especially when we adjust the cervical spine, we can also release sinuses. We're really just working on getting that actual drainage going. Oftentimes, we talk about when that congestion stays stagnant, that's when infection can really take root. And so, really, ultimately, making sure we're focused on the drainage and keeping everything moving is going to stay in front of the symptoms. So, we have overactive immune system, drainage is backed up, and then the last thing we have is we have stress, tension, and inflammation, and making our body more susceptible to when different pathogens come our way, but especially when our body is stuck in this chronic stress state. We have high cortisol because of what's called your HPA axis, which is your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is your stress response. And cortisol is a stress hormone. And actually, cortisol acutely or in the short term actually decreases the immune response. But over time, this is that sympathetic dominance where we say stress isn't inherently bad in small bursts, but over time, we're not meant to live in chronic stress. We're meant to have stress and then relaxation, and we're supposed to balance that. But when we're living in this chronic stress, we have high cortisol. And high cortisol over time increases inflammation and histamine responses. So that's another thing we're looking at. We're looking at the immune system. How do we strengthen the immune system? How do we keep things moving and all of the congestion moving and moving out? And then also underlying how is the nervous system dysregulated and how can we balance that to be able to decrease inflammation and decrease the response when exposed to these allergens. So traditional medicine oftentimes focuses on covering up the symptoms. And so oftentimes allergy medications will be focused on your itchy eyes or your runny nose, when instead we're saying, well, what is going on under the surface? And so we really want to look at that at twofold. We want to say, there's a time and place for medication, but are we really ever addressing the actual issue, or are we only just covering up the symptoms? And so it's really our goal as holistic providers to really say, how can we get to the root cause and support the body so that the body's natural immune response is strengthened and supported to fight off different things when exposed versus being more sensitive. So the main thing is what is causing the decrease or the shift in this immune response? Well, one of the things that is causing it is, especially in kids, is a disruption of the gut microbiome. And so much of our immune system is housed in our gut. Our gut is is a massive portion of our immune system because it's a very diverse um, relationship between good bacteria and bad bacteria. And when we have C-sections, we actually are not exposed to the vaginal microbiome or flora. And so therefore, we actually have a decrease in the diversity of pathogens or in microbes that we see in the gut. And so now there's some really cool being able to swab post C-section because we're realizing that that first dose of really of the flora really is a key foundational piece in building up that gut microbiome. And so that we're housing good bacteria, so we're not creating an opportunity for bad bacteria to take root. And so that's one thing that's really fascinating and some really interesting research on that's happening and saying what the priority of being exposed to that bacteria early and how that really can change the trajectory of the gut microbiome and therefore ultimately the immune system, because we really want to make sure we have a strong gut microbiome. The other thing that's impacting the gut microbiome is the overuse of antibiotics. Now, antibiotics have a time and place. If you have strep or in different times, you're grateful to have antibiotics. But the problem that's happening is that antibiotics are being overused. And therefore, it's killing off good bacteria and bad bacteria and really diminishing our gut microbiome. And it's actually said that it could take up to 2 years for the gut microbiome to restore after one round of antibiotics. And so, like I said, antibiotics are necessary in a time and place, but at what cost, especially when so much of our immune system is housed in the gut. And so when we're seeing these recurrent antibiotic uses, what we're seeing is we're really wiping out that gut microbiome and in turn wiping out that immune system because the immune system is housed in the gut. So much of it is housed in the gut. And so if we're constantly wiping it out, we're not giving good bacteria the opportunity to really take root, and we're flushing out. Antibiotics don't know the difference between good bacteria and bad bacteria, and they really just wipe out everything. And so when we're focusing on the importance of having a diverse microbiome, the key factor in the health of your gut is the diversity of the bacteria that are in the gut. And when we're using things like antibiotics, it really diminishes that gut microbiome and in turn diminishes the immune system. So that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a rise in seasonal allergies is because we're seeing a rise in these things in antibiotics and in C-sections, both not inherently negative, both used for a time and a place. But when overused or not looked at, what other ways can we compensate or how can we address some of the other things that come out of using these in the gut microbiome. So gut microbiome, those are the things that are impacting it. The second thing is, like we talked about, the actual plumbing, actual drainage. And so especially as chiropractors, we really want to make sure we're flushing everything out. Like I talked about, we want to look at the cervical spine and adjustments in the cervical spine where there's tension helps tremendously with keeping things moving. We can release sinuses, we can release ears. All of that is so interrelated, especially if we see a kiddo with a lot of allergies, a lot of ear infections, chronically sick. It really is an actual drainage issue, and keeping everything in proper alignment and decreasing tension in those areas really does help keep things moving. In addition, you can also do a lymphatic massage, which is pretty simple. Really want to just keep that stuff draining. We don't want that to stay stagnant. Another great option is a good saline rinse, like an X-Clear, because that really is going to keep things moving, or even a neti pot. We really want to flush that stuff out. Ideally with chiropractic, we're going to process that stuff better, but versus, flushing it out using a rinse. But the idea is we want to clear out those sinuses and keep that stuff moving so infection doesn't take root. So an actual plumbing problem let's check and let's see where is there tension or where is there misalignments. Let's release the ears, release the sinuses, release the cervical spine or the neck, and let's keep that fluid moving. Another thing is really even in the upper thoracic spine. When we have a chronic cough or congestion, we can actually see a lot of tension in the upper thoracic spine. And that's really that lingering congestion, especially chest congestion. And so focusing on our adjustments so that we can keep things moving. And then lastly, the immune system. I know we touched on it already, but we always talk about how we have a sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, and a parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. And really, ultimately, what happens is we get stuck in this fight or flight or gas pedal, and we don't push the brake pedal often enough. And when we don't push the brake pedal often enough, we become high stress. And when we're high stress, one of the things it does is it makes our immune system susceptible. When we have higher periods of stress, we are more immunocompromised, we are more susceptible because our body is more worn out. That goes into, like I talked about, the HPA axis. The HPA axis is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which produces cortisol or the stress hormone, ultimately producing inflammation, adrenal fatigue, and even histamine intolerance. And so when we have this cycle of we're stuck on the gas pedal, we're really not even setting our bodies up for success because our bodies are so worn out to begin with. And so acutely cortisol decreases the immune response. But over time, it produces more inflammation, more susceptibility to histamine, and also a decreased immune response because our bodies are worn out or immunocompromised. And so when we're able to use something like neurologically-focused chiropractic or doing things to help balance your nervous system or regulate it, which means essentially let's push the brake pedal, the body has more bandwidth to when it's exposed to a pathogen or to an allergen, it has more bandwidth and isn't quite as close to the threshold where it really starts experiencing symptoms. That immune system is able to fight because it's not already so worn out. Now, what is happening in this world that our kiddos are more stressed out than ever and our adults are more stressed out than ever, therefore contributing to this high levels of cortisol, adrenal fatigue, nervous system dysregulation? Well, in kiddos and in adults, we always talk about 3 forms of stress. So stress is not just mental and emotional stress like we commonly think of it, although mental and emotional stress is a huge component. And so we have mental and emotional stress. In kids, that can be maternal mental and emotional stress in utero, and that can also be mental and emotional stress as they're, growing up. And then in adults, mental and emotional stress is the most typical form of stress you would think of. So the higher mental and emotional stress, the more we're shifted over into this fight or flight. The second thing we have is we have physical stress. Now, physical stress in adults can be slips, falls, accidents, prolonged posture, exercise. That's physical stress. In babies, the biggest form of physical stress they've had thus far is the birthing process, and how intense or how many different interventions were utilized in that birthing process determines the degree of physical stress we expect to see in baby. So not necessarily that, some of the interventions aren't necessary. Interventions and the more complicated birth is or high risk, the more physical stress we expect to see in baby, especially because baby is pulled out by their head and their neck. And then the third form of stress is environmental or chemical stress. And now that's anything our body is exposed to that our body is supposed to filter out, and it has the capacity to filter out. But we really want to make sure we're doing our part in supporting our body, that the more it's exposed to, the higher our toxic load. And so that can be another form of stress placed on our body. So those are the 3 forms of stress, and that's shifting this into this sympathetic dominance or, stimulating this cortisol, high stress, and therefore putting our immune system or making our immune system more susceptible. So those are three ways or three things that can be contributing to seasonal allergies that go deeper than addressing just the root cause or just the symptoms, getting deeper to the root cause. And so we love to talk to you more about how neurologically focused chiropractic care can help, especially with seasonal allergies. Comment below if you or your family has experienced seasonal allergies and if you've given any of these things a try.